"I don't care if you die tonight," my son shouted, gripping his car keys. "I'm not wiping your drool or cleaning up after your old sick body." And with that, he stormed out the door. My own son. The same boy I nursed through pneumonia at 6, who once refused to sleep without my hand in his. He didn't just leave me that day. He abandoned me. I was 83 years old, sitting on the edge of my floral armchair in my living room, a blanket wrapped around my legs, and a medical folder on my lap, filled with hospital scans, grim blood work results, and notes that used words like degenerative and final stages. I had just told him I was sick, that the doctors didn't know how long I had left. And he left me. I watched through the window as his silver truck sped away down the driveway. No goodbye, no hug, no promise to call later. But what he didn't know, what nobody in my family knew, was that I had over $3.8 million sitting quietly in 2 separate bank accounts. I never told a soul. And right then I decided I was going to die with that secret, unless someone showed me they truly deserved to know. But that wasn't the last time I saw my son. Oh no. He came crawling back months later, when he accidentally found out about the money. And by then, I wasn't the same weak-old woman he left behind. My name is Margaret Rose Whitaker. I'm 84 years old, a retired nurse from Montana. I have silver blonde hair that I still wear in a tidy French twist most days, and I live alone in the house my late husband and I built nearly 50 years ago. We planted the trees out front with our bare hands. I don't have many friends anymore. Most of them passed on, or moved to retirement communities in Florida. But I loved deeply when I did. Especially my son, Thomas. He was my whole world. My only child. And maybe that's why what he did to me hurt more than the disease eating away at my body. It all started with a sharp pain in my hip. That was how I ended up at the county hospital for a scan. Then more tests. More referrals. And finally, a diagnosis no one ever wants to hear. Stage 4 cancer. The kind that spreads slowly, silently, until one day your legs don't carry you quite as far, and you're too tired to finish your toast. I sat on that hospital bench, staring at the scan results. And for the first time in years, I cried. Not because I was afraid of dying, but because I knew I'd have to tell Thomas. He used to call every Sunday. He used to laugh and tell me how no girl would ever match my cooking. But after his father died, he changed. He became colder, more distant, always busy, always needing money, always rushing me off the phone. But still, I was his mother. I raised him. I gave him everything. So when I finally told him the truth, when I sat him down and gently explained the scans, the pain, the treatments, I expected at least a hug. What I got was rage. He stood in the kitchen, face twisted like I had betrayed him. "So what, you expect me to take care of you now? I've got a wife, a kid, a life, Mom." I tried to explain. "No, Thomas, I'm not asking for anything. I thought you'd want to know." His laugh was bitter. "You thought wrong. I'm not doing this. You always baby me, always expect me to drop everything. Well, not this time. You're on your own." Then he said it, the one line I will never forget. "You're just a sick, lonely woman now. You have nothing left to give." He was wrong, of course. I had millions, and I would have given him every cent if he had just stayed. The days after he left were quiet. Too quiet. I tried to make tea but couldn't lift the kettle. I burned my toast twice and fed it to the birds. The mailbox overflowed with hospital bills and pharmacy letters. No one came by. No one called. The silence in that big house felt like it was slowly swallowing me whole. So I did something I hadn't done in years. I wrote a letter to my lawyer. And I made changes to my will. A month later, I hired a nurse named Ellie. She was young, kind, and didn't ask too many questions. She helped me into the bath. She baked with me. She read to me by the fire. And then one morning, she found me collapsed in the hallway. I woke up in the hospital with machines beeping and a sharp chill in my bones. The doctors told me I had maybe 6 months left, if I was lucky. Ellie visited every single day. My son, not once. One chilly Tuesday, I got a birthday card in the mail. It was from a church in Nebraska. Not from Thomas. Not from my granddaughter. I held that card and wept like a child. I wasn't just dying. I was forgotten. But then, something changed. One morning, Ellie told me Thomas had called. Out of nowhere. Your son sounded shaken, she said. Like he'd just found out something big. I stared at her, confused. Found out what? She shrugged. I don't know. But he's on his way here. An hour later, I heard tires on the gravel. I looked out the window, and there he was. Thomas. Looking pale. Panicked. Sweaty. Holding a bouquet of gas station flowers. He ran to the door, knocked like a madman, and the moment I opened it, he shouted, Mom! I didn't know you had millions. Why didn't you tell me? I stared at him for a long moment. Then, without blinking, I said, Because you told me I had nothing left to give. He stood on my porch, clutching those sad little flowers like they were a peace treaty. Mom, please. I didn't mean what I said back then, he stammered. You caught me at a bad time, that's all. I didn't say a word. Not right away. I let the silence sit heavy between us, like the months he'd ignored me, the calls he never returned, the birthday he forgot. He finally looked up, a twitch in his jaw. Ellie told me, You're sick. And she also said you have a lot of money saved up. I had no idea, Mom. Why didn't you ever tell me? I leaned against the doorway. Because when I did need you, Thomas, all you saw was a burden. He flinched, but didn't deny it. I could feel his panic through the screen door. The desperation. The calculation behind his eyes. He wasn't here because he missed me. He was here because he smelled money. It still hurt, how fast he ran the moment I got sick. But what stung deeper was how fast he came back once he learned I wasn't poor. All my life, I tried to protect him. When his father died in that lumberyard accident, Thomas was just 16. I worked double shifts at the hospital, skipped meals to pay for his basketball camps, cashed out my own retirement to cover his college. But somewhere along the way, he stopped seeing me as a person, and started seeing me as a bank account with a rocking chair. I let him in that morning, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to know how far he'd go. We sat in the kitchen, the old kettle hissing on the stove. He started small talk, asked about my medication, pretended to care. Then came the question, So, Ellie mentioned you've got savings. I mean, you always lived so modest. I didn't know you were sitting on millions. I sipped my tea. Why does it matter, Thomas? He scratched the back of his neck, forcing a laugh. No reason. I've been under a lot of pressure, you know? With the mortgage. Layoffs at the plant. Madison's tuition is coming up. I just thought, maybe you'd want to help out. There it was. The real reason he came back. Not love. Need. I stood up and walked to the cabinet. I pulled out a thin envelope, the same kind I used for letters. I handed it to him. This is for you. His eyes lit up. He tore it open like it held gold. But all it contained was a list of every unanswered call I'd made to him over the last 6 months. Times, dates, voicemails. He stared at it in confusion. What is this? That's what I got when I needed you, I said quietly. So if you want to know what you get from me now, that list should be your answer. He slammed his palm on the table. Jesus, Mom, don't be so dramatic. I said I was sorry. I turned my back to him. No, Thomas, you said you were broke. He stormed out again. Didn't say goodbye. Didn't ask if I needed help getting back to bed. And I sat there, staring at the door, wondering if I'd gone too far. I wanted to believe my son could change. I wanted to believe that maybe, deep down, he still loved me. But it's hard to tell the difference between remorse and regret, especially when money's involved. That night, I sat in bed with Ellie beside me. She held my hand while I cried, not because I was sick, but because I felt like a fool for still hoping. 2 weeks later, I received a call from a lawyer in Chicago. Apparently, Thomas had tried to gain access to one of my bank accounts. He pretended to be my power of attorney. He forged documents, claimed I was too ill to manage my affairs, and requested a wire transfer of $500,000. The bank flagged it. The lawyer called me directly. I felt like I'd been stabbed in the heart. This wasn't just desperation anymore. This was betrayal. I called Thomas the next morning. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I simply said, "You tried to steal from me." He didn't deny it. He just muttered, "You won't need it soon anyway." And in that moment, something inside me broke completely. I hung up the phone, walked to the drawer beside my bed, opened my will, and began crossing out names, starting with his. I sat alone in my bedroom that night, a single lamp casting yellow light over the document on my lap. My will. The same will I'd carefully drafted with love over the years. His name was on nearly every page. Until now. With shaking fingers and a heavy heart, I drew a red line through his name. Every mention of Thomas Alexander Whitaker. Gone. I didn't cry. Not anymore. Something colder had taken its place. Not hate. Not revenge. Just clarity. He had already buried me in his mind. He just wanted the cash. Well, let him grieve when he finds out he was never even in the obituary section of my final goodbye. You know, when I was younger, I thought love was unconditional. That a mother's love, no matter how battered or bruised, would always reach through the fire. But love, real love, needs respect. I gave birth to him in a blizzard, held him through croup, heartbreak, and teenage tantrums. I sacrificed everything. And now, at 84, all I got in return was paperwork from a fraud claim. So I changed that. Then I locked it in my desk drawer. And I called my lawyer again. I wanted to make sure the money went to someone who still knew what kindness looked like. I didn't see Thomas for weeks after that call. But I wasn't surprised when a car finally rolled up the driveway again. Only this time, it wasn't his truck. It was a sleek black sedan, rented. And he wasn't alone. A woman got out on heels too high for gravel and a smile too tight to be sincere. Her name was Tiffany. Apparently, his new fiancée. They came bearing fake warmth and boxed chocolates. "Mom," Thomas said, pulling me into a half-hug I didn't return. Tiffany really wanted to meet you. She stepped forward. We heard you weren't doing so well. Just thought we'd drop by and lift your spirits. Her voice was syrupy. Her eyes were scanning the house like she was already picturing which furniture would be hers. I played along. I smiled. I offered them tea. I even pretended to be thrilled when Tiffany said, "We were thinking of starting a family soon. Maybe move in for a bit? Help take care of things around here." I poured her tea slowly and replied, "Oh, sweetheart, this place is already taken care of." She blinked. "By who?" I looked her dead in the eye. "By someone who didn't need a bank balance to remember I exist." Thomas coughed awkwardly. "Mom, come on. Don't make this weird." "Oh, I'm not making anything weird," I said calmly. "But since you're both here, there's something I'd like to share." I left them in the kitchen and returned with 2 envelopes, one for each of them. They both looked eager, hungry. I handed them over without a word. They tore them open. Inside was a single photo each. Tiffany's was a picture of Thomas at age 7, curled up on my chest after he had pneumonia. Mine, not hers. Thomas's envelope held a photo of me in the hospital bed last fall, pale, alone, hooked to machines, captioned with the words, "You never showed up." Tiffany didn't know what to say. Thomas looked furious. "What kind of sick game is this?" he spat. I stood. "It's not a game, Thomas. It's a test. You failed it." They left in silence. I never saw her again. But Thomas, he wasn't done. A few days later, Ellie came running into my room, her face pale. "Miss Margaret, you won't believe what Thomas did." I looked up, calm. "He filed an emergency petition with a judge," she said breathlessly. "Says you're no longer of sound mind. He's trying to get full conservatorship. He wants access to everything." I blinked slowly and whispered, "Then I guess it's time I show the world what kind of man he really is." I wasn't surprised, not even a little. When Ellie told me Thomas had gone to a judge, claiming I was senile and unfit to manage my own affairs, I didn't flinch. He'd finally shown his full hand. He didn't come back for love. He came to take over everything. My house, my savings, my life. But what Thomas didn't know was that I had prepared for this. And I wasn't going to go down quietly. Back when I worked at Johns Hopkins, I saw hundreds of families come undone the moment a parent got sick. But I always thought mine would be different. That my son would protect me. Now I realized I had to protect myself from him, and I had the perfect person to help me do it. Ellie. I was called to court. Imagine that, an 84-year-old woman with stage 4 cancer, dragged into a cold courtroom by her own child. Thomas wore a sharp suit and brought a lawyer. He didn't even look at me when I entered. The judge asked a few standard questions. Thomas's lawyer handed over medical reports, partial ones. He said I had trouble remembering things, that I was confused, that I'd recently left the stove on, that I'd forgotten names. And some of it was true. But they twisted everything. When it was my turn to speak, I stood, slowly, and smiled at the judge. "My name is Margaret Rose Whitaker," I said, loud and clear. "And while I may be dying, I am not dead yet. Nor am I incompetent." I looked Thomas in the eye. "I may forget my pain pills. I may forget what day it is. But I will never forget that you left me to suffer alone. And now, you want to own my life because I have money." The judge raised a brow. Thomas shifted in his seat. Then Ellie stood up. She walked to the bench with a folder in hand. Your Honor, she said, I have video logs recorded daily of Miss Whitaker's mental state. At her request, she pulled up a tablet. The courtroom watched clips, me reading newspapers, chatting, cooking breakfast. Sharp, clear, fully aware. And then Ellie dropped the final bomb. Also, we believe Mr. Whitaker attempted to access her bank accounts through fraud. Here's the affidavit from the financial institution. Gasps. Even the judge leaned forward. Mr. Whitaker, the judge said coolly, you may want to consult your attorney. After the hearing, word spread quickly. Cousins who hadn't called in years suddenly reached out. Some sided with Thomas. Others messaged me with backhanded concern. One even texted, "Wow, I didn't know you were rich, Aunt Maggie. I guess we all should have visited more, huh?" That one stung. It confirmed what I feared. People only came when they smelled a payday. Even family. A week later, I invited Ellie and her partner, Jen, over for dinner. I told them everything. The accounts, the properties, the trust fund, the hidden assets Thomas never knew about. "Ellie," I said as we ate pie, "you are the daughter I never had." She froze. I smiled gently. "I want you to be the executor of my estate. I'm changing everything. You'll manage my health directives, my property, everything." She cried. Right there at the table. Not because of the money, but because I trusted her. The next morning, Thomas showed up again. He didn't knock. He barged in. "Mom," he said, red-faced, "what the hell did you tell the judge? You made me look like a criminal." I stood my ground. "No, Thomas, you did that all by yourself." He took a deep breath, then said something that made the air go cold. "If I can't have the money legally, maybe I'll just take it another way." And that's when I knew. My own son might be capable of something far worse than betrayal. He said it with a crooked smile, like it was a joke. But there was no laughter in his eyes. "If I can't have the money legally, maybe I'll just take it another way." I stood frozen in the doorway, my hand gripping the back of a chair. Was he threatening me? Thomas, my baby boy, the one I used to sing to sleep, now standing in my living room, not as a son, but a stranger with sharp teeth. There are few pains worse than losing a child. But losing one who's still alive, who looks you in the eye and chooses greed over love, that's a grief that never stops bleeding. I didn't argue with him. I didn't scream. I simply said, "Get out of my house, Thomas, and don't come back unless you plan to say goodbye properly." His face twitched. "You think I'm scared of you, old woman?" I held my head high. "No, but you should be scared of who I've become." That night, I couldn't sleep. I double-locked the doors, closed every window, sat in my room with my reading lamp on and Ellie sleeping down the hall. What if he really did something reckless? What if he tried to harm me? He had nothing to lose now. And sometimes, nothing is the most dangerous weapon of all. I thought about calling the police, but what would I say? My son threatened me for my inheritance. Would they believe me? Would they care? The next day, I called my lawyer and had a state security expert come out. Motion detectors, security cameras, deadbolts, emergency alert button installed by my bed. And most importantly, my will was sealed in a separate location. Untouchable. I moved a majority of my money into a charitable living trust under Ellie's management. If anything happened to me, Thomas wouldn't see a penny. Not even the tax refund check I kept in the kitchen drawer. Days passed. I watched through curtains, jumped at every noise. Thomas didn't show. But the damage had already been done. The house felt colder, emptier. And worst of all, I missed him. Not the man he'd become, but the boy he used to be. The boy who once made me a card that said, "Best Mom Ever," in messy crayon. The boy who cried when I cut my hand on the garden shears. The boy who used to run to me when he had nightmares. Where had that boy gone? One afternoon, I was sitting in the sunroom, wrapped in a shawl, when Ellie came in with her phone. "Margaret," she said gently, "I have someone who wants to say hi." On the screen was her niece, Daisy. A bubbly, bright 10-year-old who waved like I was her favorite teacher. "Ellie said they talked about me all the time. She says you're like the wise queen in her fairy tale books," Ellie smiled. Tears welled in my eyes. This was love. Unasked for. Freely given. Undeserved even, but honest. I realized right then. I might have lost a son, but I was gaining a legacy bigger than blood. One crisp morning, I received a letter in the mail. Certified. Stamped. Official. From Thomas's lawyer. Inside, a formal request to challenge my mental fitness again. He was trying again, using a different judge this time, citing emotional instability, erratic behavior, and even mentioning Ellie's inappropriate influence. He had doubled down. This wasn't just about the money anymore. This was war. I handed the letter to Ellie, who read it silently, her face hardening. "He won't stop, will he?" she whispered. I shook my head slowly. "No," I said. "Not until he gets what he wants, or until I remind him who he's messing with." She looked at me, concerned. "And how are you going to do that?" I turned to her, my voice steady. "I've already hired a private investigator." The day I hired that private investigator, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Power. Not revenge. Not cruelty. Just clarity. If Thomas was going to dig up lies to prove I was unfit, then I was going to dig up the truth about who he really was behind that polished smile and Sunday suit. And trust me, the truth was uglier than I expected. I used to believe that blood was thicker than water, that no matter what, family would come through, that even if they hurt you, deep down, they'd still show up when it mattered. But now I know. Sometimes, family is just a last name, and the people who really love you, they don't need to be related by blood. 3 weeks later, I received a thick brown envelope. Ellie sat beside me as I opened it. Inside were photos, receipts, surveillance records. Turns out Thomas had taken out 2 massive loans in the past year, one using a fake business name. He'd also been gambling, heavily. Online casinos, late-night bets. Even pawned some family heirlooms I didn't know were missing. And worse, he'd recently searched ways to declare an elderly parent incompetent on his home computer. It made my stomach turn. This wasn't just a desperate man. This was a planned betrayal. I forwarded the entire report to my lawyer. I also made sure the estate documents were notarized, double-copied, and sealed in a fireproof vault. Then I called the local sheriff's office and gave them a friendly heads-up. Not because I expected trouble, but because I was done waiting to be a victim. I even drafted a final letter, one that would be read aloud at my memorial service, should I pass before this ended. And in that letter, I named every person who showed me kindness. Thomas wasn't on it. One rainy Thursday, I was walking back from the porch when I slipped. I hit my back hard against the wood and couldn't move for a few minutes. Ellie wasn't home yet. I panicked. Had he come by? Was it sabotage? A million thoughts rushed through my head, but the doctors later confirmed it was just an accident. But the fear lingered. Even nature felt like it could betray me now. That's what happens when trust dies. The world feels a little less safe. Ellie found something while helping me clean out the attic. A dusty shoebox with old cassette tapes. It was my late husband's voice. He used to record little messages for me when he worked out of town. One message said, "If you're listening to this and I'm not there, just remember something. Don't ever let anyone dim your light, Maggie. Not even our son. You shine. You always shine." I wept like I hadn't in years, not because I missed him, but because his voice reminded me of me, the strong, bright woman I used to be. And then came the final blow. A letter. Handwritten. Delivered by a courier. It was from Thomas. "I hope you're happy. Everyone's laughing at me now. You ruined my name. But you know what, Mom? When you're gone, I'll still be your son. And I'll find a way to get what's mine, whether you like it or not." No apology. No remorse. Just threats. And one more desperate lie, that he still believed he was entitled to anything. I stood by the fire that night, holding his letter in my hand. Ellie asked, "Are you going to respond?" I shook my head. No. I tossed it into the flames and watched it curl and burn. She looked at me, eyes full of worry. "Then what now?" I turned to her, my voice steady. "Now, I teach him what happens when a woman he thought was weak shows him just how powerful she really is." Because what Thomas didn't know, I had one more surprise left. And this one would change everything. The sun had barely risen when I called my lawyer. "I'm ready," I told him. "No more waiting. Let's execute the surprise." Because my son thought he'd won. He thought he had time. That I was old, tired, and close to death. That I wouldn't fight back. That I'd just fade away. But what he didn't know was this. I had been planning my final move all along, and it would make sure the world remembered the truth, long after I was gone. I used to think dying meant losing, but sometimes letting go is the only way to win. Letting go of guilt, of the dream of who someone could have been, of the hope that one day he'd just walk in and say, "I'm sorry, Mom. I love you." That apology never came. So instead, I wrote a letter. Not for him, but for the world. That's right. With the help of my lawyer, I hosted a public reading of my will. A local reporter was invited. Several friends from church. Even Ellie's niece sat in the front row with wide eyes. And when it was my turn, I wheeled myself up to the microphone and began. "My name is Margaret Rose Whitaker. I'm 84 years old. I'm dying. And I've been betrayed by my own son. Not once, but again and again. I gave him everything. And when I needed him most, he left. Then he came back. Not for love, but for money. So here is what I've decided to do." Thomas showed up halfway through the reading. He stood in the back of the room, arms folded, face red. And when the lawyer announced that not a single dollar of my estate was going to him, he shouted, "You're all crazy. This is elder abuse. She's not even mentally stable." But no one flinched. The audience had seen the videos, the documents. He was exposed. Every time he tried to manipulate me, I had receipts. And this moment was my peace. Here's what I did. I gave $500,000 to children's cancer research, another $300,000 to a women's shelter in Montana, a private college fund set aside for Daisy, Ellie's niece. I transferred the deed of my home to Ellie and granted her lifetime stewardship of my ranch property. And the remaining balance, nearly $2.4 million, was placed into a foundation supporting elderly care to make sure no other old woman was ever left alone like I was. Every cent was earned by people who had shown up, not by people who walked out when it mattered. After the reading, Thomas stormed toward me. "You ruined my life, you bitter old hag." Ellie stepped between us, but I raised my hand. No, Thomas. You ruined your own life. I just made sure the world knew who you really were. He didn't say another word, just turned and walked away for the last time. And that's when I felt it. That final string that had tied my heart to his snapped. A few weeks later, I was back on the porch. Warm blanket, hot cocoa. Daisy is laughing in the background. Ellie was reading the paper beside me. I wasn't cured. I was still sick. But I was free. Free from regret. Free from hoping he'd change. Free from the fear that my life had meant nothing. Because now my life had a purpose. Not just in dollars, but in dignity. If you're listening to my story today, I want you to remember something. Your worth isn't tied to who loves you, especially if they only love you when they think you have something to give. You matter. Your voice matters. And even when people try to erase you, you get to choose how your story ends. Just like I did. Oh, and one last thing. I had this whole story recorded. Every letter. Every court hearing. Every betrayal. Why? Because sometimes the best revenge is letting the world hear the truth in your own voice. Thank you for listening. And if you're wondering what happened to Thomas, he now works 2 jobs, under investigation for fraud, and can't even afford to sue me. I guess real fortune was the peace he never found. But peace has a strange way of testing you. Just 3 months after the will reading, my body gave out. I have been having more pain lately. My breathing was shallow. Ellie begged me to try one more round of treatment, but I knew my time was close. I didn't want to spend my last days in a hospital bed, staring at blinking machines and white walls. So I chose hospice. At home. Surrounded by books, tea, the wind through the porch screen, and Ellie reading to me every afternoon. Last night I was conscious. It rained. A soft, silver rain. The kind that sounds like lullabies on the rooftop. Ellie had dozed off in the chair beside my bed. I was weak, but I lifted my hand and brushed a strand of her hair back behind her ear. "My girl," I whispered. "You saved me. Not from dying, but from dying forgotten." She stirred and took my hand. "I'll be right here," she said, her voice cracking. "I know," I smiled faintly. "That's why I can go." I don't remember much after that. Just the sound of Daisy's laughter in the next room, the smell of lavender oil Ellie rubbed into my hands, and the weight of a lifetime lifting from my chest. I passed in my sleep, the way I always prayed I would, quietly, without fanfare. But my death was not the end. 1 month later, Thomas showed up again. He didn't come to the funeral, didn't send flowers, didn't say a word to Ellie. He came for the foundation signing. Thought maybe there had been a mistake. That maybe, just maybe, he could find a loophole. But when he walked into that room, full of elderly women, cancer survivors, and little children whose treatments were being funded in my name, he realized. There was no mistake. A giant portrait of me hung in the hall behind the podium, with the words, "She gave her love to those who stayed when it mattered." He stood there for a long time. Then I turned around and left. That was the last anyone ever saw of him. 3 years later, Ellie renamed the estate, the Rose House. It became a hospice retreat for elderly women with no families, a place where no one dies alone. My room was left untouched. A framed photo of me and Ellie sits on the windowsill. Daisy still visits, often leaving wildflowers on the porch swing. And sometimes, on rainy nights, visitors say they feel someone brushing their hair behind their ear, or hear an old woman's voice whisper, "You matter. Don't let them erase you." I may have died quietly, but I was never forgotten.